A lot of people are using Sass to help them create good-looking websites these days, and they are doing so because of limitations in the CSS specification. Sass is a preprocessor, which means that when you write your styles using Sass, the styles you write are then processed and transformed into CSS, which is then used on your website. In this mini-series, we're going to take a look at some of these frustrations and how Sass solves these issues. The first thing we're going to do is to install Sass. There are many different programs you can use to work with Sass, but in this example we're going to use a program called Koala because it's super easy to set up and run, and it's free too, which is always a good thing if you're learning something new. So once you've downloaded and installed the program that you want to use, you need to set the program up. With Koala, you need to tell it where the CSS file it creates should be saved. This is the style sheets that you will link to from your web pages. You also need to tell Koala where to look for files that it should convert into CSS for you. These will normally be in folders next to the main style sheets, which are being output, so you can see here I have my Sass and CSS folders in the same directory. That's it as far as setup is concerned. We just need to go ahead and create the main Sass file which we will use to convert into CSS, which we will do in our Sass folder, and call it main.scss. If you open up the main.scss file and create just a basic style, so let's change the background of the body to pink. When you save the file, you should see a new CSS file has been created, which contains the CSS that we've just wrote in the SCSS file. Because this is just raw CSS, there is no pre-processing which is taking place, but we will come onto that later on. So now that we've set everything up, we can begin to use Sass. But before we get too far ahead of ourselves, it's worth spending some time to consider how you want to write your styles. Sass can actually be written in two very distinct styles. The first style, which is the style that I prefer, is the SCSS style. This is basically identical to CSS in terms of style, so you use curly braces and semicolons at the end of each line, and white space doesn't matter. The second style is called Sass style. This resembles Python code more than anything else, so for example, white spaces do matter in this case, and you don't use curly braces or semicolons. Each style has its own pros and cons. Sass, for example, means a lot less typing and it looks nicer, and if you're familiar with Python, you'll be familiar with Sass. On the other hand, if you know CSS, you also already know SCSS, because the layout of styles is almost identical. It follows the same basic principles as things like JavaScript and PHP in terms of using curly braces to define context and so on. The biggest reason why I prefer SCSS over Sass, however, is because of the white space having meaning in Sass. This matters most to me because if I want to move a line from one style to another, I can just copy and paste it wherever I need to with SCSS. With Sass, there is always another step that you need to consider, which is how many spaces of indentation exist in the pasted text. If you're potentially going to be restructuring your styles as you write your styles, which you will be doing if you are writing your own styles, this extra step outweighs all of the prettiness of the Sass style for me. Now that we're all set up, we can begin to look at what was the most attractive aspect of Sass to me when I first started exploring it, which was variables. One of the biggest frustrations I have had when working with native CSS is the fact that there hasn't until recently been any sort of variable system at all, which meant that every time I wanted to use a colour or specify a pixel size, for example, on borders or different elements, I would have to specify the colour or pixel size on every single occasion. If I then wanted to change this later on, of course, I would have to then reconsider and reevaluate multiple different sections. Sass variables are just what you would expect them to be, placeholders for values. Sass allows you to use variables to hold values for any CSS property. So in this case we can move the value of pink from our background into a variable. You would typically use names for your variables which are abstract enough so that they can be easily reused. So in this case we're going to call the variable secondary colour and not pink. We can then use this variable in many other places, and if we decide later on that we want to change the colour, we can just change the colour being assigned to the variable, and the Sass interpreter will update the colour throughout the entire style sheet, so you don't have to do it manually. Because the value is being used to set a colour, we're not restricted to how we can format the colour. So if we wanted to, we could use RGBA, hex code, strings, or any other CSS format. So let's add a new element. We're going to add in a border, some padding, a margin, and we're also going to specify a width for this element. If you imagine something like a blog, all of the entries in the blog will have something similar to this in terms of formatting, so that you have space on the left of the page to have a menu bar, for example. If you want to find out how wide this element is, you would normally have to calculate each of the individual values and add them all together. With Sass, however, if you're using variables, you can use the built-in operators to calculate this for you. Sass allows you to use all of the main operators, and you can use them with numbers, variables, or any combination of numbers and variables. And just by using variables and the basic operators, you can reduce the amount of time you spend writing CSS considerably. In the next video, we're going to take a look at how Sass allows you to nest styles, which is another significant time saving which Sass allows you to take advantage of. So make sure you stay tuned for that. What do you think of this video? Has it been helpful? Have you learned something new? Let me know in the comments, hit that subscribe button and check out some of these other videos.